The year was 1835, on the edge of a forgotten plantation, where moss hung from the trees like twisted curtains and the sun rarely touched the soil. There was a man whose name no one dared speak, not because they had forgotten it, not because it had faded from memory, but because they were told to forget. The plantation was called Blackthorn Estate. It was vast, surrounded by swamps that claimed horses, mud that swallowed boots, and forests so thick the wind could not pass through. From the outside, it looked like any other southern plantation. White columns, wide porches, and fields of cotton stretching endlessly toward the horizon. But inside, fear had taken residence. Not the fear of the master, not the fear of whips or punishment. Fear of one man. At least, he had been a man once. No one knew exactly when he arrived. He simply appeared one morning, shackled with the others, wrists raw, back covered in scars older than anyone could remember. He was tall, taller than most men. His shoulders were broad, his posture unbroken, but it was his eyes that unsettled everyone. They were not wild. They were not pleading. They were calm, watching, calculating. Caleb Rains, the overseer, was a cruel man, hardened by years of breaking men's spirits, shaping slaves into obedient shadows. But when he saw this man, something stirred inside him that he could not explain. For the first time, a slave did not cower under his gaze. For the first time, a man met him evenly. The quiet man did not speak unless spoken to. He worked diligently, followed orders, yet never lowered his head. At first, the other slaves avoided him. On plantations like Blackthorn, survival depended on invisibility. Those who drew attention vanished or were broken entirely. But he did not seem concerned. He simply moved through their world, silent, deliberate, unshakable. Days passed. Weeks turned into months. And then the small, inexplicable incidents began. The first was a lock on the storage shed. Broken, nothing missing, no tools disturbed. The overseer rounded up 3 men, beat them without mercy, demanding confessions. The quiet man said nothing. He did not claim credit. He did not deny it. He simply worked, silent and observant. Then the horses began to wander free. Reins cut cleanly, not torn, not mangled, precise. Again, the overseer beat 2 men, their cries echoing through the quarters. The quiet man said nothing, but the eyes of those who watched began to shift. He never seemed tired, never complained, never faltered. No matter how long the sun beat down, no matter the weight of the cotton sacks, he moved steadily, calmly, as if the labor were effortless. At night, when the others huddled in the crowded wooden quarters, exhausted from work, he stayed awake. He listened. He memorized every patrol route, every creaking floorboard, every door that stuck. He noted which guard were cruel, which were weak, which were careless, and he asked nothing. He absorbed it all, as though his mind were a net, catching every detail without fail. Then the screaming began. It was sudden, sharp, and full of terror. The overseer's house. The slaves woke, hearts pounding, unable to move. The scream stopped as abruptly as it began. By morning, the overseer was alive, but he had changed. His hands shook. His voice trembled. For the first time, he did not carry his whip. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered of ghosts. Others spoke of a man unseen who had entered the house, standing over the bed in silence, watching, waiting. The quiet man worked that morning as if nothing had happened, silent, calm, unchanged, but the overseer no longer dared meet his eyes. Weeks later, a patrol guard disappeared. He had been walking perimeter at night, lantern in hand, rifle over his shoulder. Then gone, lantern found near the swamp's edge, still lit, rifle beside it, unfired. No footprints leading away, only toward the swamp. And then nothing. No body, no struggle, no sound. The slaves noticed a new scar on the quiet man's forearm. Fresh, clean, no explanation. And no one asked. By now, they were beginning to understand. He was not like them. He was doing something else. Something dangerous. Something deliberate. One night, an older slave named Josiah gathered courage. He approached the quiet man as he sat alone in shadow. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice shaking. The man looked at him, eyes steady, unblinking. I was someone they tried to erase, he said. Josiah's brow furrowed. What does that mean? The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked, How many guard patrol at night? Josiah hesitated. 6. The man shook his head. 5. No, 6, Josiah corrected. One won't be there tomorrow, the quiet man said. Josiah felt cold. How do you know? The man's expression never changed. Because he will not wake. The next morning, chaos descended on the plantation. One of the guards was found in the barn, alive but broken, his leg bent in a way that seemed impossible. Rifle snapped beside him. His mouth moved constantly, repeating, he was there, but when asked to, he could not answer. The quiet man had visited him, and the terror he left behind was beyond words. From that day forward, the plantation began to change. Guards walked in pairs. Doors were locked earlier. Lights stayed on all night. More men were hired. But nothing worked. Whoever was doing this, always one step ahead, always watching, always patient, could not be caught. Deep in the slave quarters, the quiet man sat in darkness, eyes open, breathing slow, listening, waiting. Fear was his weapon, and he was just getting started. No one knew his name. Not anymore. The official ledger, every slave recorded meticulously, had his entry scratched out. Not faded, not accidentally torn. Scratched violently, as if someone wanted to erase the proof he had ever existed. But erasing a name does not erase a man, especially not one who has already begun his revenge. And as the sun set over Blackthorn Estate, casting long shadows over the endless cotton fields, a single truth settled over plantation. This was no ordinary slave. This was something else, something terrifying, and he had only just begun. Weeks passed, but Blackthorn Estate was no longer the same. The whisper of his name, though erased from every ledger and record, spread in silence through the quarters and across the fields. Guards who had once walked confidently now glanced over their shoulders at every step. The overseers, once cruel and unchallenged, began to hesitate, second-guessing their own authority. Something had entered the plantation, something unseen, relentless, and terrifying. The quiet man moved like a shadow. He did not strike openly, did not speak. He simply existed where he should not, a presence that could not be anticipated or contained. Each act was deliberate. Each disappearance, each broken whip, each sabotaged lock carried a precision that could only come from patience and cunning. Fear spread faster than fire through dry cotton. It grew in the dark, in the corners where the overseers could not see, in the silence between their orders. One night, as the harvest moon rose over the fields, the master's prize horse vanished. Riders searched for hours, beating the dense brush and marshes with torches, calling its name into the darkness. When the animal returned the next morning, calm and unhurt, the master discovered his favorite riding whip snapped cleanly in two. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Only the unmistakable mark of someone who could act unseen, leaving terror behind as a signature. The slaves whispered among themselves. Some said he was a spirit. Others swore he was the embodiment of vengeance itself. But those who dared look into his eyes could see nothing of the supernatural, only a calm, calculated intelligence that made their own fear feel physical. It was in his patience, his silence, that his power lay. Then came the night of the barn fire. Flames ripped through the wooden structure, illuminating the cotton fields in an orange glow that burned the eyes even from a distance. Guards scrambled, shouting orders, while the master cursed, helpless. But when the smoke cleared, the barn itself had suffered little damage. Valuable goods remained untouched, and strangely, the ledger of slaves and accounts had been partially burned. Pages charred as if deliberately targeted. It was an act designed to unsettle, to mark the plantation, to show that the quiet man could touch them without ever being seen. The overseer began to notice small changes in his own routines. Doors he used freely before were checked twice. Floorboards that had never concerned him now made him pause. He began to whisper warnings to other guards. The master, once a man of rigid control, walked with caution. He avoided certain fields, avoided certain paths, always aware that the quiet man was watching. Even among the slaves, a shift had occurred. They no longer saw him as just a fellow prisoner of chains. They saw him as something else, something beyond fear. Men who had survived years under brutal whips now watched him with a mixture of awe and dread. His presence reminded them of power they could scarcely understand, power that was deliberate, precise, and unyielding. Josiah, the older man once timid, approached him again. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly, voice trembling in the shadows of quarters. The quiet man's gaze did not waver. His voice was calm, measured, and chilling. "I am erasing the erasers," he said. Every act of sabotage was symbolic. One guard broken, one horse freed, one ledger partially destroyed. Each a warning, each a lesson. Fear had become his tool, and he wielded it with surgical precision. He never struck without reason, never punished without purpose. And yet, the dread he inspired was absolute. The master tried to respond with brute force. He hired more men, armed patrols, dogs trained to hunt, torches to illuminate the dark paths. But it was all in vain. Doors bolted too late. Horses returned unharmed. Men disappeared without a struggle, without a trace. It was as though the very air itself had turned against them. Every effort to subdue or control failed because the quiet man understood the limits of fear and had mastered it. Night after night, the guards grew more anxious, their confidence eroded by the unknown. They whispered of seeing shadows where there should have been none. They spoke of fleeting movements in the corner of their eyes, of cold drafts that carried no wind. And every morning, one more patrol returned broken, terrified, or simply absent. In the quarters, the other slaves began to speak at him in hushed tones, calling him the shadow among men, the eyes in the dark. But they never dared speak his true name, for it had been violently erased, and perhaps for a reason. By now, he had become more than a man to them. He was a presence, a force, a reckoning. And as the nights wore on, his legend grew, not because of loud defiance, not because of speeches or threats, but because of his calm inevitability. He had learned every weakness, every flaw, every blind spot on the plantation. He had no need to strike openly. His reputation, built in silence and shadows, had begun to suffocate the plantation like a heavy fog. And then, as the harvest season drew to a close, the quiet man made his most daring act yet. A guard who had once mocked him, who had laughed at the whispers of his name, was found one morning in the fields. His eyes were wide with terror, his body contorted in ways that should have been impossible. He could speak only one sentence, repeated over and over. He was there. He was there. No one dared ask for details. The answer would not be given, and no one could see what he had seen. The quiet man's influence had reached every corner of Blackthorn Estate. Even the master, once unchallenged, now walked with fear pressing against his chest. Orders were hesitated over. Threats were questioned. Punishments delayed. The plantation had become a place of anxiety, paranoia, and suspense. Every shadow, every creaking floorboard, every distant rustle of leaves could signal his presence. And the quiet man, sitting in the darkness of slave quarters, eyes open, breathing slow, watched it all unfold with a patience that made dread itself a living, growing thing. By the end of Chunk 2, one truth was undeniable. Blackthorn Estate was no longer a plantation ruled by whips and chains. It was ruled by fear. Fear wielded by a man whose name no ledger could hold, whose presence could not be denied, whose patience and cunning had transformed him into something more than a slave. He was a force, and he had only just begun. By the time the harvest ended, Blackthorn Estate was unrecognizable. What had once been a plantation of control, and order had become a place of constant dread. The master, once imposing and cruel, walked the grounds cautiously, his eyes darting to shadows that weren't there. Overseers, men who had once whipped men into obedience without hesitation, now moved silently, checking over their shoulders, hearts pounding with unspoken fear. Guards whispered rumors in the dark, questioning one another, eyes wide, voices low. And through it all, the quiet man remained unseen. Yet he was everywhere. He moved like smoke. He left no footprints, no marks, no evidence of his passage. But his presence could be felt. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle in the trees, every sudden whisper of the wind seemed to carry his intent. He was patient, deliberate, and inhumanly precise. Fear, not violence, was his weapon, and he had become a master. One night, the master, driven nearly to madness by the impossibility of control, decided to confront him. He waited near the quarters, lantern in hand, heart pounding, every nerve straining. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, calm, deliberate, unflinching. The master's voice trembled. What are you?" he demanded, trying to sound commanding but failing. The quiet man's eyes met his. Calm, steady, unyielding. "I am what you tried to erase," he said simply. "And now I erase what you built on fear." The master stumbled backward, his knees weak. For the first time in his life, he felt the true weight of terror, the kind that burrows into your bones and refuses to leave. The quiet man did not strike, did not touch him. He simply stood there, and the fear was enough. The master fled, never fully regaining confidence, never trusting the very men he had once commanded. Stories began to spread among the slaves. They whispered of a man who could appear and disappear at will. Tales of figures standing over sleeping men, leaving them paralyzed with terror. Accounts of scars that appeared mysteriously, of horses returning freed, rifles broken, ledgers burned. The quiet man had become a legend, a figure more powerful than any master, more feared than any whip. But then, as suddenly as he had arrived, he vanished. No body, no ledger entry, no trace left behind. The plantation remained, but the man was gone. Some said he had walked into the swamp and disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the mist and the silence of the night. Others swore they saw glimpses of him in the distance, fleeting shadows that vanished when approached. Still, some believe he had left Blackthorn entirely, moving from plantation to plantation, his presence a silent warning, a harbinger of the fear that no ledger could erase. His name, as history would later record, was gone, violently erased, deliberately scratched out of every official account. Yet the story lived. Among those who survived Blackthorn, whispers of his deeds persisted, passed from one generation to the next. They spoke of a man whose calm eyes could strip courage from even the fiercest overseer. They told of a man whose patient vengeance transformed fear into a weapon far deadlier than chains, whips, or guns. The plantation itself became a shadow of its former self. Guards never walked alone. Doors were bolted early, and lights stayed on all night. The master remained haunted, a man no longer feared but afraid. Even the strongest, most cruel men on the estate had learned a vital lesson. Some power cannot be fought with force, only respected or feared. And so, the quiet man became more than a story. He became a symbol, a warning, a presence in the imagination of all who lived under the plantation's oppressive sun. He had taken what was built on cruelty and broken it silently, invisibly, methodically. Each act, each disappearance, each carefully placed scar was a lesson, one that no ledger could record, no official report could describe. In the end, what remained was fear. Not fear of punishment, not fear of death, fear of the unseen, fear of the inevitable, fear of a man who could not be erased. Blackthorn Estate became a place haunted not by ghosts or spirits, but by the story of a man who walked among them, silent, patient, and unstoppable. And somewhere in the shadows of history, he waits still. No ledger entry, no name, only a legacy of fear. Because chains can be broken, whips can be silenced, and men can be beaten. But true terror is immortal. The quiet man, the one history tried to erase, succeeded. Not by destroying lives openly, not by screaming vengeance, but by becoming a shadow that haunted the hearts of men. A ghost of justice, patient, deliberate, and terrifying in his perfection. And though his body, his name, and his face may be lost to time, the story of Blackthorn Estate endures. It endures in whispers. It endures in fear. And it endures as a warning that some men, even those enslaved, erased, forgotten, hold a power that cannot be accounted for, measured, or erased. The last act of the quiet man was simple: to vanish, leaving behind only the consequences of his presence. And in doing so, he became eternal. No ledger could hold him. No overseer could break him. No story could contain him. He was, and always would be, the most dangerous slave in American history, a man erased but never forgotten,